In 1990, an OBGYN from Indiana was standing inside of the Sistine Chapel inside the Vatican. And he's standing there and he's looking up at Michelangelo's famous ceiling. If you haven't been there, if you don't know what it is, I believe there's 13 panels on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And they're each depicting a story from the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible. And as he's standing there, what his name is? Frank Musburger, I think his name is. Or Frank Meshberger, that's what it is. Dr. Frank Meshberger from Indiana. He's standing there looking up at the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, and he noticed something that nobody had ever noticed in the 507 years since the Sistine Chapel was first opened. He looked up at the panel. I believe it's the third panel. It's the image, the painting of creation. We all know it. It's the image of God in the clouds. He's reaching out to David, and David is reaching out to him. And in the picture, we all know they don't quite touch. It's famous. It's arguably the most famous panel on the ceiling. And he's looking at this panel. And he's seeing something that looked familiar to him. And he's looking at the cloud, the encasing, the pink drapery that's wrapped around God. And he notices that it is identical to the human the human anatomy of the brain, of the human brain. And so he doesn't say anything. He goes home and he takes out, the Netter's anatomy manual. He looks at his pictures. He compares the two, and he realizes that it is, in fact, identical. And so he writes a paper about this, about how Michelangelo hid this anatomy of the brain inside, in this panel on the Sistine Chapel. So now, initially, you might think that that's a one-off, and that maybe he's just Michelangelo's hiding some Easter eggs in his work. But Johns Hopkins University got a hold of this information and decided to do their own investigation. So now they're looking at the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, and they notice in one of the other panels, I think it's either the first or the second, it's called the separation of light and darkness, right? And what they notice, and God's in there, he's separating the light from the darkness, and they notice that inside of God's throat in the painting is like the spinal cord, the cerebellum. It's like the reptilian brain, or I think it's the cerebellum, the reptilian brain inside God's throat. And it's a spinal column that goes all the way down his chest. And again, you might think that this is just a coincidence, that Michelangelo's not trying to tell us anything at all. But on the side panels of the chapel are these people called sibyls. I don't know exactly what their role was at the time, but they had their skull peeled back, and you wouldn't notice it unless you looked at it, because it's painted like it's a golden crown on them. If you look, you can see that their skull is peeled back and their brain is exposed. And yet again, another neurological reference that Michelangelo has embedded into this famous chapel, right? And if you keep looking, right, you can find other Easter eggs that are in there. So on my honeymoon in this past July, in July 2025, my wife and I, we went into the Sistine Chapel, and I was really excited about this. I wanted to see the brain and in creation. I wanted to see the limbic system. I wanted to see the spinal column and all that inside of God's throat. And then I wanted to see the sibyls on the side walls. But I was also hopeful that our tour guide would be able to give me some more Easter eggs. So I'm standing in there looking up at the ceiling, and I asked our tour guide, I said, I heard about this, that, and the other thing. Are there any other Easter eggs that exist inside of the chapel? And she says, well, actually, yes, there is. If you look back here on the altar wall at the back of the Sistine Chapel is this huge mural, again, by Michelangelo, and it's called The Last Judgment. And if you're looking at the mural, it's huge, and it's a massive deal. It's incredible work of art. And at the top, you can see the souls ascending to heaven, and at the bottom, you can see the other souls descending into hell. And at the top of the painting, right where Jesus is in the painting, there's one soul who's holding his own skin. And what my tour guide told me was that the Easter egg is that it is thought that Michelangelo painted his own skin or his own self-portrait on this skin. And if you put the side by side together, you can see that it kind of resembles it. And I said, wow, that's really interesting. Why would he do that? And he said, well, or, our tour guide said that because he was so tired after the many years and the hard, arduous work of doing this mural that this was all that was left of him at the end of it. And I thought, that's pretty interesting. You're telling me that this genius, this great artist, this legendary figure of mankind, of humanity's history, who hid all of these references to the brain throughout this chapel, he put his self-portrait on that skin just because he was tired? I found that a little hard to believe. And this stuck with me for weeks after the honeymoon. And we're going through it and we're just, back to our day-to-day life. And I kept thinking about this. And one day I was like, I want to find out a little bit more about this part of the mural. So I look it up. I said, who is the soul holding his skin? And it turns out it's Saint Bartholomew. And I'm like, okay, who's Saint Bartholomew? Saint Bartholomew is one of Jesus's disciples. Sometimes he's referred to as Nathaniel in the Bible. And Saint Bartholomew is famous for holding his own skin in all of his paintings, his statues and whatnot, because he was killed by being flayed alive. And I found that to be really interesting, right? So I look a little bit deeper and I said, well, who is Saint Bartholomew? And as I'm reading, as I'm studying, I come across this fact that floored me. I couldn't believe it. Saint Bartholomew is the patron saint of nervous system disorders, of the central nervous system. And once again, here we are inside the Sistine Chapel, and Michelangelo has created all of these references to the brain. And I was like, what is Michelangelo trying to tell us about the brain? St. Bartholomew in particular, if you look at his statue in the Duomo in Milan, he's skin flung over his shoulder and all of his nerves are exposed, right? And so the story goes that he is the patron saint of the central nervous system, of nervous system disorders, because he is symbolic of having removed all of your outer external false layers and showing the true self that's underneath. And in my eyes, that is what we're all trying to get back to. I think that is the end road of all chronic pain and chronic health conditions, is exactly that, is shedding the false external layers and getting back to who you truly are. So he is our namesake here at Saint Bartholomew for those reasons, among many others that we'll explore and tell you about along the way.